Hey, welcome everybody. Let's talk real estate. Your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current commercial real estate market here in Southern California. As we take a no BS look at both sides of the issues driving this market today to find the best solutions going forward. With our man right in the middle, it's Barry Saywitz. Hey, Barry.
Hey, good morning, Paul, and good morning to all of our viewers and our listeners out there. It is Tuesday. We are in the month of December. We are heading into the winter months. I want to welcome everybody back. We're going to talk some real estate. We're going to do today's show a little bit differently as it's our last show of the year, and then we'll take a little break and we'll be back after the first of the year. So we thought we'd do a little wrap up on what we've seen and what we've heard over the course of the year, and then what are the expectations going into the new year. Before we get going, Paul, I'm surprised that you are not dressed in like Michigan garb top to bottom after that win over the weekend.
You would think so. The miracle that always happens at the end of the year. We lose 4 or 5 games, but as long as you beat Ohio State, Michigan fans are happy.
Yeah, a lot of really depressed Ohio State fans, Buckeye fans, sorry. Paul had a party at his house, that's for sure.
Ongoing.
So, with all of that said, also, it is flu season. I know I'm just recovering from it badly. And so make sure you get your flu shots. They got a new COVID shot if that's your thing as well.
Yes.
Otherwise, just get some lozenges and some vitamin
And
C.
thanks for coming in, even though you're a little under the weather here.
Yeah,
today.
no. So we're going to tough through it, and we'll try and prognosticate and try and do a look back and a look forward. So with all of that said, I am Barry Saywitz, president of the Saywitz Company. Let's talk some real estate. Paul, what do you want to talk about? Where should we start? I'd like to start with going back to the beginning of the year, because at the beginning of the year, some of the things that we can look back at and say, where were we and where are we today?
Yeah.
You had super high interest rates. You had super high inflation. You had Democrats in control in Washington. You have multiple wars going on. You have inflation out of control.
And deals not being done.
No, and really sort of stagnation across all sectors of whether it's the commercial or the residential real estate markets. Everything sort of just took a slowdown to wait and see what happened. And then what happened was not so much, right? And so as the year progressed, people kind of got used to the higher interest rates, but it didn't really spur on any more deals. There weren't people fire sailing stuff like we thought they would. We didn't see prices dramatically drop like you would expect in a higher interest rate market. You basically just saw transaction volume slow down, which then had other repercussions in terms of what's going on in the marketplace.
2 things surprised me from that period as you look back. One was there were a lot of predictions. Who are the big groups that own all the big high-rise office towers in downtown L.A. and other places here, San Francisco? A couple of them were talking about turning the properties back to the bank, and I thought, oh boy, here it goes. It's just you're going to see a collapse in the office market, stuff being sold at fire sale, like I remember happening years ago when the Japanese came in and bought a bunch of these properties and stuff here. I didn't see that happen. Some of them get turned back, but I didn't see the collapse and where people just gave up and sent them back to the bank en masse.
Yeah, and I think part of that is I don't think the banks wanted them back because nobody really knows what to do with it.
Right.
And the next guy who comes along can't really make a whole better charge of it, and nobody's excited to want to own, high-rise office space in today's environment. So you have people that are just sort of waiting it out. I also think that you have a lot of people that were not over-leveraged. You have some of these bigger real estate players that have deeper pockets and have the ability to weather the storm, whether they like it or not.
Who's the one I'm thinking of that begins with a B or something? I'm trying to. Anyway, I'll think of it in a moment. But
you
there's
let me know when
a couple of big institutional players, and they were literally going to give these back, and everybody thought that'll start the collapse. Like in San Francisco, they thought a lot of these towers would go back, or in other places, and then they'd get sold at a fire sale. A little of that happened, but not what.
No, and what's also interesting too is the rates for high-rise office space have not really come down. You've seen people holding the rate, and maybe there's side deals that get done, that people don't know about at lesser numbers. But there's a certain point in time where you cannot drop the rate any lower because it impacts the value of the building, it impacts your financing, it impacts the next deal that you do. We talked about that on one of the shows where you can't really go that low. And so you don't have this fire sale effect. What you do have is concessions are up. And so if you're looking for space, and you're willing to sign a long-term lease, and you're looking in a high-rise or a mid-rise office building, you're going to make a very good deal. The dilemma is there aren't that many people out there looking for
Yeah.
large chunks of space that are willing to make a long-term commitment, because you still have this uncertainty about where the overall economy was going to go, and we still have some uncertainty as to where things are going to go.
So we didn't see total collapse of the office that people were afraid of, nor did we see massive return to the office and everything's back again. It's still kind of treading water, it seems like. We're not
Yeah, I
sure
think
what
you're
it is.
just going to see slow and go on the office side of things, and you're still going to see concessions from landlords where landlords have a bunch of vacant space and really need to make deals. And I think you're also going to continue to see, as tenants have leases that are rolling, they're going to rethink their space, how it's used, whether they need all of it, where they need to be. But I also think that you have a lot of tenants that are just happy to just renew their lease, get some sort of break in the rent, and not have to go through the hassle of moving. You don't see a lot of movement out in the marketplace other than people who really need to make a change, whether my space is too small, too big, or I just need different stuff.
Right. All right, so that was one perception. The other perception is once we get past the election, whoever wins, whew, we'll have some sort of certainty, the markets will adjust, and life will get back to normal. I see some happiness, some enthusiasm out there, particularly among those who voted Republican, but I don't see are interest rates just going to come back down and everything's going to come back to normal and we've gone through a period. I don't know.
Yeah, I think, well, one, it's only been a couple of weeks. Number two, Trump's not in office yet. And
Right.
number three, they haven't implemented any of the things that they've been talking about to see if that is going to have a trickle down effect into other aspects of the economy. But everybody's on edge waiting for it to happen. And so I think in the meantime, what you're going to see is people go through the holidays, enjoy themselves. You saw a massive amount of spending. Spending was up from a retail perspective for Black Friday, and used to be Black Friday was one day, right? You just
Right.
roll it into one day, and you do your thing, and you go hit the store. Now it's Black Friday,
Cyber Monday.
but you have Black Friday week, and then
Yeah.
I think you have Black Friday month now for the month of December.
Right.
So Amazon has extended their Black Friday thing. Walmart has extended their Black Friday. And so it just becomes a theme of just trying to get people to spend their money and buy as much as they
So
can.
is it back to perception again? Is it just how the people feel? That was one of the frustrations, whether you voted Democrat or Republican. The economy wasn't really in terrible shape. It had come out of a high inflationary period. Inflation seemed to have been cooled down and things were getting better, but there wasn't a perception. The public didn't feel that.
Yeah, I
It
know. I
didn't
guess
react that
I
way.
guess it's a function of who you talk to, right? I mean, if you're struggling to buy eggs and you're struggling to put a tank of gas in your car and you're struggling to pay your rent, I think those people would tell you that, hey, I'm feeling the pinch.
Because it
you-
continued. The prices didn't
Well,
come down, right?
Yeah, and again, I'm no prognosticator and economic expert, but I will tell you this: if I go for a fast food burger, fries, and a drink, and it now costs me $16, $18, $20,
Yeah, which it does.
and then you tell me that inflation is down, did that burger now go back to $10 or $12? It did not, right?
But it never goes back down. I mean, that's but
I know,
in the
but-
'80s when we had that inflationary period, houses and cars and everything shot up. It never. My general perception is once you get a price up,
Yeah, you're not going to unwind it.
you're not going to win.
Right. So the issue then is, okay, so did the cost of a carton of eggs come down? Yeah, it did. Did the cost of gas come from highs in 6s and 7s here in California to threes and fours,
Fours, yeah.
right? And so you rarely see a 5 in it, and it's 2s elsewhere around the country. It did, but that doesn't mean that the cost of every other goods has come down. Now, I bought a 65-inch TV for one of the properties that we're renovating to put it in there to help try and get it rented in one of the apartments, and that 65-inch TV was $228, right? I mean, for a I don't want to say top of the line, but damn nice TV.
Yeah, right.
Right. I mean, so
220.
did the cost of that go? Oh, sure, it did. Right. But that doesn't mean that everything came down, and that doesn't mean my overall cost of living came down. It doesn't mean going out for a meal with my family came down. Right. Those things are still expensive. People are still feeling that, and they're going to continue to feel that. That has not changed. So the question then becomes, what will happen going forward in the overall economy to direct people's either perception or their reality
Right.
that they're actually, have more money to be able to either spend or save or do stuff with.
Yeah, I think it's got to be wages have to go up at some point in time because I don't think prices are ever going to come back down.
Well,
They-
you have minimum wage just increased again, right, in
Right.
California, mandatory minimum wage increase, and then you have minimum wage increase For hospitality workers, you have minimum wage.
And all the big labor contracts that were negotiated of automakers and other things over the last year, where they sort of locked in higher wages for these guys.
But again, here's the problem. If my wages go up and I own a Burger King, I'm not making less money. I'm going to raise the cost of the burger.
Absolutely.
So you and I are paying for that. It goes around. You know, I asked the guy at Starbucks, you know, now that you got a raise in your minimum wage, do you feel like you're making more money? And the guy said to me, yeah. And I said, but if your landlord raises your rent and for the cost for you to go get gas or eggs or everything else goes up, did you really make any more money? And the perception was, the guy said, yes, I'm making more money. I got a raise.
See? Perception,
right? So
is reality.
perception becomes reality, and I think that is going to be one of the key themes for 2020.
So here's one of my perceptions that you just corrected me off air. I thought rates have been cut, twice now, here by the end of 2024. Maybe going to get cut some more. I thought that just immediately lowers the cost to go out and buy everything, including commercial real estate. But you said commercial real estate loans haven't come down.
No, in fact, they went up. I mean, they just pulled back a little bit this last week, but for the last month,
how does that happen?
They went up. Because, again, perception is not reality. Perception is if the Fed drops the rate and they announce it on the news, everything goes down.
Next week.
But the Fed rate is not tied directly to the lending rate of what a bank is willing to lend you money for on a commercial real estate deal. It is tied to your credit card. So if your credit card interest rate was 30%, it might go down to 29%, right? It's still a ridiculous amount of money, and you're still paying a lot of juice on your credit card. If you went to go get a
Isn't
car,
that the truth? When did we accept 30%? That used to be considered loan sharking.
Right, and people don't realize, you know, they spend, they put money on have credit card will travel, right? And I spend it, and I get the points and all the goodies, and then all of a sudden my bill comes, and I wind up making the minimum payment, right? And so I'll pay $100 because that's what I'm used to. Except the $100 doesn't even cover the interest on the thing anymore. And so, again, this is common misperception in terms of what happens. The interest rates for commercial loans, the interest rates for multifamily loans, for industrial loans, and even for home loans really didn't come down. I mean, they came down.
Why? Because the banks are nervous?
Well, one, the bank had already incorporated into their lending practices, you know, what they thought the rates would be based on what the Fed was going to do. Secondly, Fed rate is a short-term rate, right? If you're going to go get a 5 or a 10-year loan on a property, that's a long-term rate. And so banks are looking at it from a long-term perspective, and banks still have to be able to turn a profit and are still not interested in making risky loans. So you still have lower loan to values. You still have, while interest rates are better than they were at the peak earlier in the year, there's no question, but they're still not to the point where somebody would jump up and down and get excited. And so it's not really getting people off the fence. What I've seen on the commercial side of things is that you have sellers now coming back to the market thinking, okay, the Fed dropped the interest rates, therefore somebody should be able to get a cheaper interest rate. Therefore, I should get my yesterday's price that I was trying to get last year.
You harp on that all the time, and it's
well,
so true.
Right?
Yeah, it's all about yesterday's perception for many people, or the perception that you're in trouble, you're going to make me a deal in, let's say, office buildings. Or I should be able to get what I used to get on that building, and now I can't. But there's a refusal to accept the new norm. Is there a new norm that will settle in and will accept higher McDonald's prices, higher interest rates, and we'll just adjust, and that's the way we do business, and it's easier to make a deal because everybody's on the same page?
Well, I guess that's just a function of, you know, getting people to be able to invest in deals that somewhat make some sense. So we've talked about it on a number of shows. For deals that are, I have to have it because of the location or because of the proximity to something else or because there's value added or there's upside,
right? Those
deals have a different perception than a deal that's just supposed to stand on its own, and you want to sell me CVS and you want to sell it to me at a 4 cap so that I'm getting a 4% return on my money, but then I'm going to go borrow money at 6.5%. I have an inverse relationship between my return and my interest, and so I'm actually losing money. So in fact, I'm not getting 4%.
So you're betting on long-term appreciation or something to change down the road.
Or it doesn't hunt, right? Which is why you have lower transaction volume, because there's a certain amount of people who go, well, that doesn't make any sense to me, right? If I could borrow at 3 and I could get a 5 cap, then my return could be 7 or 8% because I've arbitraged the cap rate, right? I borrow low and I get a higher return. And if I'm able to get the rent up or the rent increases over time, I will do better over time. If you flip that and you borrow at 6.5 and you have a 4% return, you're just losing money.
So today we're going to open up phone lines. President Trump, if you're listening, you're sitting down in Mar-a-Lago making a lot of decisions, coming up with lots of appointments. Barry Saywitz is going to give you a bit of advice to help the commercial real estate market.
Which is take it back long and straight and then hit it as far as you can right down the fairway, right? And I think he already knows that.
He already knows that one. Okay.
Yeah, and when you're...
I mean, really, what would you do? What would you love to see? What would your section of the world, people who buy and trade buildings, who own buildings, what are they hoping will happen?
Well, I mean, my personal perception is I don't think you're going to see great strides here in the next 3 to 6 months, because it's going to take time for whatever economic policies get put in place.
And yet there's that honeymoon period always of the first 6 months when it seems like something's happening and finally change is going to be happening.
Well, and I had a conversation yesterday with one of my bankers, and they said, people are talking about that there might be this Santa effect, which is that there's a bump in the stock market, there's a bump in spending, and there's a bump in perception that the economy is just fine through the holidays, because people are excited about Trump taking office.
Change.
People are excited about the fact that they think that the future will be better than the past, whatever that means to you.
Right.
And so if that's the case and that's the perception, then I spend accordingly. And if I do that, it stimulates the rest of the economy. And you might see that temporarily, and then the question will be, what happens after the first of the year? But it makes me very nervous during the holidays as a landlord for multifamily, because I'm fearful that people get that false perception. They spend too much, and then they struggle with their rent come January 1st.
Can't pay you. Yeah.
And so it'll be interesting to see what people's perception. You have certain people out there, their perception is, I should get a raise every year because I fogged a mirror. Right? Or, hey, there's inflation.
Is that the test these days? I didn't know that.
Some places, right? Or, hey, I'm here, I deserve a raise. And it's not I deserve a raise because I did X, Y, and Z. It's I need a raise. Or I need a raise. My expenses are higher, so I just need a raise, right? And so you have a lot of that going on. You certainly have a lot of that in California, more so than in other places. And I think you're going to continue to see that. But then you have, as an employer, you have insurance goes up, taxes go up, regulations go up. You just get squeezed from all sides. And
what do we do for the one that nobody talks about, which is insurance? I don't know why that isn't front page news here in California or Florida or other places here where insurance for everything, cars, homes, property, is just going double.
Yeah, and I hope that that's on Trump's agenda to try and figure something out. I think you don't hear about it. And part of that is a function of competition, because as you drive competition, especially out of California, out of Florida, out of high impact areas, then you only have a few players left and they can do what they want. And so the cost goes up exponentially. And we had a busted pipe at one of our properties, and there was no chance I was going to file an insurance claim. We just have to pay it, because the cost of trying to get new insurance and the risk of getting dropped is worse than just sucking it up and paying for it yourself.
Yeah.
And so it's like, why have insurance if you're not even going to use it? So we'll see. So that's going to be an important one. The other thing I think is these other economic factors around us, like homelessness, like the perception of inflation, and people's perception of where the housing market is going to go, right? We haven't talked about the housing market in a number of months, but we did a bunch of shows on them, and the market is just slow, right? I mean, it's slow.
Slower than it's been in years. The number of people aren't selling, people aren't buying. It's just everybody's kind of holding.
And the reason I think for that is the person who has a very low interest rate has no motivation to sell, because then they're going to go trade their 2% or their 3% interest rate for a 5 or 6 or something else.
Right.
There's no motivation to do that. And then the idea of I trade up and I get a bigger and a better and a nicer and a something other house, people go, hey, I'm going to stay here, right? I'm fine where I'm at, because I can't pay double.
What's the unintended consequences of any of all this stuff we're talking about? For example, immigration. So if we really do clamp down, try and start rounding up, kicking out millions of people, does that affect I can't get workers. I can't, or open up more housing that they were living in, or whatever. I don't know. Is there an unintended consequence to any of these things?
I don't know. I think that the proof will be in the pudding. I guess on the one hand, if you owned a farm and you were employing illegal aliens that got here that weren't supposed to be here for less than
Which
what
I'm
it
sorry
would
that
cost.
probably many were or are. Yeah.
So if you could do that for less than
Restaurants, yeah.
than what it would cost to hire somebody who's supposed to be here, then it's going to cost you more money. But then what do? You just pass it on to the consumer,
Right.
right? So you're not going to go broke. You'll just
So we're
raise
gonna
the
see-
cost of carrots or whatever it is that you're farming.
It just seems like some of these things, there's an unintended consequence always to some of these things that we try to tackle here. All right, so that's uncertain. What are you certain about? It seems like multifamily is still pretty strong. It's not overbuilt. We still need desperately housing here in Southern California. So
Well, I think on the multifamily, you're going to continue to see new projects come off the ground because there's a need for housing.
right.
At the same time, you're not seeing the rent growth that you had before where people are raising rents 10, 20%.
Right.
Number one, you have rent control, but what's interesting about the rent control, everybody screamed, oh, it's rent control, landlords ripping off tenants, this and that. And now most of the landlords that I talk to on the multifamily side are not even increasing their tenants' rent in most instances the maximum amount of the rent control.
Really?
Because,
Okay.
Because
Why?
the economy doesn't bear it, because the market doesn't bear it.
Right.
Right? So if I'm afraid that somebody would leave or would go get a cheaper or different place, then I guess I don't raise the rent.
Yet you pointed out several times that the unintended consequence, one of the unintended consequences of rent control is if I can only raise it once a year at a certain rate, I better go for the full thing because I see prices rising and I only get to do this once.
But you can only do that if the market will take it.
If
And
the
so
market will
the
take it.
other byproduct of that is that as a landlord, and this is not our policy, but as a landlord, one would think if I can't raise the rent and my costs go up, I'm going to get squeezed. Therefore,
Right.
I'm not going to fix up my property. I can't. Not because I don't want to, but because I don't have the money to do it. So if you said, I'm going to raise your rent $100, but I'm going to give you new carpet and a new fridge, somebody might say, it's not a bad deal. I mean,
Right.
I don't want my rent raised, but at least I got something for it.
Right.
Versus if I said, I'm raising your rent $100, tough, that's the deal, right?
Right.
And you're still below market, and you should say thank you, right? Versus I said, I'm raising your rent $100, I'm not doing anything, and then they said, well, for that price, I'll move down the street, and I'll get a newer, nicer, different place. So I think you're going to see, steady rent growth, but I think you're going to continue to see expenses go up higher than rent growth, which is going to put some pressure on people in the multifamily sector.
And again, what I'm always surprised when we have these conversations is for all the complaints about the cost in California and the low cap rates and I can't make as much money on it, I don't see everybody leaving. The Dave Barry hasn't come in yet and say I'm packing up and moving to Tennessee here yet.
Yeah, no, but the reality of it is you have a lot of investors that are looking elsewhere because the returns are better in other states, and the risk of government regulations and limitations is a lot less in other places than California, that's for sure.
Yeah.
But people that are in California that are committed to it for whatever reason, you just muddle through it and you figure out how to deal with it. But I don't expect that prices are going to come down across the board in the multifamily sector. Now, the interesting thing, if we want to shift gears for a second, into the industrial, because when we started the year for industrial, I mean, industrial has been on a tear. It has been the most popular sector in the
Better than
commercial-
Class A office in some cases. I'd rather have that.
Well,
yeah.
for sure, better than Class A office. The fact of the matter is that you had rent increases in rent growth in the industrial sector, double digits for 5-6 years in a row.
Because we need warehouses for all the stuff being delivered online.
But now what's happened in the last 6 months is you've seen because the interest rates are so high for people to purchase, the price on the sales price for industrial buildings has come down and has softened and flattened. And I don't want to say the industrial market's soft by any means, but in pockets where there is extra space now, or there's space that's sitting because you just don't have as many people renting it, or because no one can stomach the high rents, you now have landlords giving free rent where they weren't before. You now
Wow,
have
okay.
landlords giving other kinds of goodies and concessions where you just didn't see that before. And so there is, I don't want to call it a reckoning, but there is a correction in the industrial market. Now, the fact of the matter is you had rents go from what was 70 or 80 cents a square foot a month to $1.70 or
Yeah.
$1.80. And if
All-time highs. Yeah.
and if those rents are back to $1.40 or $1.50, while they are a drop from the peak, they are still twice what they were.
So I'm going to
Not that
replay
long
this
ago.
for you in a couple of weeks when Bill Shopoff comes back in here. He's certainly one of the kingpins of industrial properties all around. He buys these warehouses in the Inland Empire and other places, the Westminster Mall and other things like that.
Well, there's still demand for good product out there, and there's not a glut of industrial space, but there are pockets and stuff is not renting in a day, and no different than the residential market. There's not 10 people clamoring over one warehouse like there used to be.
And are those people worried that we might really have tariffs and trade wars and that would hurt trade, stuff coming in from China, and therefore I don't need as much
Well,
space to store?
I think if you talk to importers, for sure, it's going
Yeah.
to impact them. But for the person who's not necessarily dealing with a product coming over from China, then that's not as big of an issue. I think the bigger issue, if I'm a landlord on the industrial side, is my tenant stable? Is my tenant going to be able to pay the rent? And so, regardless of what the rent is are you going to be able to pay it? Because if I make a deal with you and you go under in a year and the market's not as strong, then I've got risk. So if you're an industrial tenant and you have good credit and you're out in the marketplace today, I think you'll make a much better deal than you did a year or two ago for sure. And I think you're going to feel some love from some landlords who would want you, right? But it's back to that same old adage, which is if I have shaky credit and I'm not going to command the same kind of respect as if I'm a big company with good credit.
So the last sector is always the one that nobody can figure out. We've all waited for the retail apocalypse to happen here, shopping centers to be torn down and turned into something else. Certainly we've seen it with some malls, Westminster Mall and other malls, Laguna Hills Mall being torn down and repurposed and rethought out.
Well, we did a number of shows on the retail sector throughout the year, and I think the general consensus on the retail side of things is that market is not struggling, right? And while the perception during COVID was that retail stinks and I don't want to touch it with a
Exactly.
10-foot pole, this is not reality in today's world. And so again, you have to break retail down into big box, into inline spaces, into restaurants, into specialty
The
spaces.
small stuff still seems to be strong. It's the big stuff, the big boxes and
But the big boxes, they cut it up and make it smaller, and then they rent it out. And there's more guys out there looking for smaller space than there are bigger space. And so that's just a function of the next generation of what bigger box
Well, I'm
retail
curious
looks
to
like.
hear if Bill will tell us what his plans are for the Westminster Mall.
I expect that we'll hear something about how that goes. But I think, look, you can look at other types of regional malls where they're constantly upgrading the restaurants or the tenants that are in there and trying to get a new look to draw people
And
to those
building more multifamily. Taking some
Well,
of the big
yeah,
boxes.
I mean, look, you take some of the extra parking and then you can go build something else on it, and that's the highest and best use. But I think, from a retail perspective, the biggest challenge I think going forward on the retail side, on top of finding the right location if you're a retail operator, is the cost of construction, right? Because you
Right.
still have very, very high cost of construction, whether it's materials or labor, or both. And so the cost to get a new facility up and running is expensive for both landlord and tenant, depending upon who's chipping in. So retail, I expect that you're going to continue to see this sort of steady climb based on the fact that there's not a lot of new construction and that there's a reasonably low amount of vacancy going forward.
Okay, bold prediction. This is the time to look into the crystal ball, sift through the gaze, make some wild, good or bad. Give me something that nobody's seeing that you're going to roll the dice and say, this might happen.
Yeah, I don't know what this might happen.
That we can
would
come back a
be.
year from now and laugh or say, wow, he really knew what he was talking about.
Right, I have no idea what I'm talking about, and most of the time I'm just making it up. But what I would say is that
We didn't want to admit that. So
yeah, well, I have no problem admitting it. People call me out on it all the time. But the fact is that what happens on the global stage from a political standpoint and from an economic standpoint eventually will trickle back to what's going on in the real estate markets here in California and elsewhere around the country.
It's not an immediate reaction, but
No,
there is a
because
reaction.
There's not a direct correlation between, hey, there's a war in Ukraine and my housing cost went up or my rent went up. Those are
Or
not
down or whatever.
No,
yeah.
but the fact of the matter is, if the overall economy is doing better, if people's perception
That's
is
the
that it's
key.
doing better,
That's the key.
and if people believe that tomorrow is better than today, then I think you have forward progress, which you've just failed to have for the last however many months with what's gone on with the election dragging out and nobody really knowing who was going to win until the very
Seemed
end.
like a squeaker right to the end. The one thing I heard this year, and I don't remember exactly what the terms were, but a couple of you guys came in and said, awful lot of properties going to have to get refinanced because their loan is going to come due, and they were in a cheap money, and now they're going to have to face some new reality. And what's that going to do? Are they going to dump them? Are they going to? Some guy said how many are coming due in like in the next 3 years or a couple of years or something.
Right, but the Fed's going to meet again in a couple of weeks, and if they do what everybody expects, which is drop the rates again, if you get the short-term rates down a couple of more chops, then you're going to start to see interest rates get into that sort of 5% range. I don't think you're going to see 3s and 4s on the interest rates, but if you're not in the 6s and 7s, people can live with 5, and then people can adjust their modeling and their thinking and their MO around what that number winds up being. The problem is, if I'm at 6.5 or 7 today and I think it's going to 5, I wait.
Yeah.
Right. If I was at 5 and I thought it was going to 6 or 7,
I sell.
Or I just wait and hope it comes back down, and then you miss the boat. And so you have a lot of people that are trying to guess and figure it out. But just like you say, if I feel good that this one or two things in the economy is going well for me, then maybe that alters my thinking.
So do you feel good as we look ahead here?
Yeah, I don't feel. I'm getting over the flu. I don't feel
That's
that
what I'm
great.
saying. So wrong day to ask.
Well, I would also tell you that
things
I'm
suck.
cautiously optimistic. I mean, I feel good about the fact that I think there's going to be change, and I think you're going to see a lot of positive things come out relative to where they were before on a bunch of different fronts. And I hope that some of the political things get sorted out where there's a clear direction so people understand it. But at the same time, I just don't think you're going to wake up one day and then the green light's on and everybody goes.
Well, that's what we were hoping for.
I don't think you're going to see that. I think you're going to see continued, struggling along where people have to work to try and make deals. And I think you're going to see a lot of people in the real estate segments that normally are either hustling to make deals at the end of the year to try and get them done, or if you didn't really have a lot of deals, then you just go hit the golf course or take off and whatever. And I think you're going to see a lot of people take off because I think there's a lot of people that don't have a lot of stuff in the pipe. And so you're just going to come back and after the first of the year and try it again. I mean, that's all you can do.
Okay. Well, we'll do the same thing after the first of the year. We'll come back and try it again. That's all we can do.
That's it. So in the interim, I mean, to everybody out there, happy holidays and enjoy yourselves. And we'll see you back here after the first of the year, and we'll talk some more real estate.
Okay.
So for Paul, I'm Barry. We'll see you back here again on Let's Talk Real Estate.
Well, there you have it. You've been listening to Let's Talk Real Estate, your weekly BS with Barry Saywitz about the current state of the real commercial real estate market right here in Southern California. On Orange County's only community radio station, OC Talk Radio, streaming live from our studio here at the University of California, Irvine's Beale Applied